I swear I've deleted and rewritten this post like 7 times. My hands are literally shaking as I type this out on my phone. Everyone's asleep in the house and I'm just sitting here in the bathroom with the shower running so he doesn't hear me crying. I need to get this out before I completely lose it. My name is Natalie Reed. People call me Nat. I'm 31. He's Ethan Baker, 32. We've been married for 3 years, and up until 5 hours ago, I honestly thought we were the real deal, the kind of couple people envied. We met at one of those ridiculously stuffy charity galas my family hosts every spring. Very black tie, very old money trying to look effortless. To understand the scope of the betrayal, you have to understand my family. The Reeds are comfortable, not private island rich, but generational wealth comfortable. My great-grandfather founded a highly successful tech manufacturing company decades ago. My dad, Mr. Douglas Reed, runs it, and he is obsessed with legacy and bringing good, solid people into the fold. I have a substantial trust fund, the kind that whispers sweet nothings about stability, and my dad saw Ethan as the perfect, ambitious, hardworking addition. Ethan was different. He was an aspiring architect from rural Idaho, a charming, self-deprecating guy with massive dreams. He seemed so genuine compared to the pre-vetted guys I usually met. He looked into my eyes, and he listened. My dad adored him, always going on about how Ethan was like the son he never had. We had just celebrated our 3-year anniversary. Last weekend, actually, we renewed our vows. It was a small, intimate thing at the old Reed Lake house. Ethan wrote his own. Y'all, he literally cried reading them. Real, honest-to-God tears streaming down his face as he told me I was his anchor and his greatest inspiration. My mom, Mrs. Nancy Reed, was sobbing. I believed him. I believed every single tear-soaked syllable. This week, I was supposed to be on a 4-day girls' trip to Nashville with my 3 best friends. Day 2, one friend got food poisoning and another had an office emergency. We looked at each other and realized the trip was a bust. And that's when the disastrous, heartbreakingly naive idea hit me. The thought of his face lighting up when I surprised him 2 days early was irresistible. I booked the earliest flight back, swore my last friend to secrecy, and stopped to pick up his favorite craft beer and some gourmet takeout. I pulled into the driveway of our custom-built home. I used the garage keypad entry, quiet as a mouse. The house is open concept, which means sound travels. I set the food down on the kitchen island, a giddy smile already on my face. Then I heard his voice. It was coming from his home office upstairs, directly above the kitchen. He was definitely on the phone. I froze, ready to creep up. Honestly, man, this whole marriage thing is a complete nightmare. My smile vanished. My heart stopped. I stood absolutely still, waiting for the joke, the punchline, the context. I wake up every day regretting the decision, bro. Every single day. The blood drained from my face. Then came the final, devastating truth, the sentence that ripped my reality apart. If it wasn't for the Reed Trust Fund and the company connections, I'd be gone already. The only good thing about this entire situation is I don't have to worry about the rent or like any bills ever again. I heard him snort a laugh. A short, cruel burst of air. The vow renewal last weekend? Pure torture, dude. Had to stand there making up all this romantic stuff while the whole family looked on all misty-eyed. Oscar worthy, I tell you. He paused. But hey, small price to pay for the lifestyle, right? Her dad's talking about bringing me in as a junior partner next year. Once I'm established there, I'll have options. More options than just being the quote, money wife's husband. The money wife. 3 years of shared life, love, dreams, and I was reduced to a financial title. I picked up the cold beer and the takeout in absolute silence. I re-entered the garage, closed the door, and got back into my car. I drove to the nearest Target parking lot and just sat there, shaking, until the adrenaline wore off and the shock turned to a cold, hard rage. He played a long game. I had to play a smarter one. I drove around for hours, finally texting my friends that I was staying at an airport hotel. 5 days later, I came home at my originally scheduled time. I walked in, saw his face, and kissed him hello. The performance had begun. The moment the garage door closed behind me, the immediate, blinding shock of the betrayal gave way to a frighteningly cold, surgical clarity. He called his performance Oscar-worthy. Fine. I could play the supportive wife, the unsuspecting Mark, for as long as it took. My panic attack in the Target parking lot was the last emotional outburst he would ever get from me. I realized immediately that screaming, throwing a fit, or confronting him would only give him the emotional high ground and the head start to lawyer up and lock down our joint assets. I needed to move in silence and become a ghost in my own marriage. My strategy was immediate and purely financial, the quiet withdrawal. My first move, made hours later while sitting in the airport hotel, was to secure my money. I have a substantial separate bank account, the one my trust income feeds into, that Ethan has no access to. I immediately logged in, changed all the passwords to 30-character nonsense strings, and added 2-factor authentication that required my fingerprint and a code sent to my private email. I also started moving small, insignificant amounts, never over $500, from our joint accounts into my personal one every other day. It was methodical, untraceable in the daily noise of our finances, disguised as minor rebalancing. I figured if he was going to steal 3 years of my life, I could certainly preemptively reclaim some of my future security. I needed to start testing his panic levels and confirming his priorities. Ethan had been texting me nonstop while I was away, but the texts, though sweet on the surface, were laced with anxiety. One afternoon, back home, I went for a long drive, deliberately leaving my phone buried deep in my purse. When I finally got back in the car, my lock screen was an immediate reward. 27 missed calls from Ethan in 1 hour. I called back, keeping my voice light and slightly annoyed. He was practically frantic. Nat, where are you? Is everything okay with your family? He asked about my family, the money source, before he even asked about me or our relationship. I played the clueless wife. I was just at the local artisan bookstore. My phone was deep in my purse. Why? Is something wrong? The silence on his end was heavy. I could practically hear his mind cycling through his pre-written scripts, trying to calculate the next move. He knew something was shifting, even if he couldn't pinpoint what. I was unsettling his stage. Then came the first small, satisfying win, a moment of brilliant pettiness. The bathroom sink had been leaking for weeks, an annoying, constant drip he kept promising to fix. It was a perfect symbol of his neglect of our domestic reality. The day after the 27-call incident, I called a plumber without telling him. The guy showed up at 8 a.m. Ethan came downstairs in his expensive cashmere robe, clutching his coffee mug like a security blanket. "What's going on, Nat? Who is this?" he asked. Trying to project the image of the man in charge of his household, I just shrugged. "The plumber. The sink has been leaking for weeks, and you seemed busy with other things." The plumber charged us $85 for a 10-minute fix. I watched Ethan's eyes track the money as he paid the bill, mentally calculating that $85 being wasted on a small preventable maintenance issue he was supposed to handle. It was satisfying to see his face twitch with the realization that I was quietly taking back control of the details he had taken for granted. Later that week, he suggested we go away for the weekend to reconnect. The audacity was breathtaking. He was panicking and trying to lock down his mark again. I knew I had to accept, but it had to be on my terms. I told him I had a better, more nostalgic idea. We would go to the cabin. The audacity of his suggestion for a reconnection trip was breathtaking, but I knew it was my chance to accelerate the investigation. He wanted a luxury resort where he could be connected. I insisted we go to the rustic cabin my family owns up near the Canadian border. It's gorgeous, secluded, and most importantly, the Wi-Fi is unreliable and the cell service is spotty, which was the entire point. The second I suggested the cabin, I saw the mask slip. That flicker of pure disappointment was a high I hadn't felt since the betrayal. He quickly recovered with a strained, "Whatever makes you happy, babe," but I knew I had successfully cut him off from his contacts and his comfort zone. The trip was agonizingly slow, but incredibly revealing. Ethan spent almost the entire weekend in a state of agitated withdrawal, pacing and complaining about the lack of signal. He wasn't interested in the nature trails or the quiet time. He was obsessed with his phone. He kept wandering down to the farthest end of the old wooden dock, where you can sometimes snag one desperate bar of service. I followed him once, moving silently through the thick pine needles. I overheard him telling someone, a soft conspiratorial tone I'd never heard him use, that he was going crazy being trapped in the middle of nowhere and would make it up to them when he got back. The sheer entitlement, the trip confirmed two things. He was constantly communicating with someone outside our life, and that connection was more important than our 3-year marriage. When we got home Sunday night, he immediately announced he needed to run to the hardware store for stuff for work tomorrow. He was gone for over 2 hours. The hardware store is 10 minutes away. I checked our joint credit card app later. No charge from the hardware store. Instead, there was a $60 charge from a bar across town. The money was meaningless, but the deceit was a signature. Driven by a mix of cold determination and professional curiosity, I always excelled at accounting. I began digging into our financial history. What I found was a clear pattern. He had pulled nearly $17,000 from our joint accounts over the past 3 years for vague business expenses and investments. Crucially, every large withdrawal occurred right before he claimed to be visiting his ailing mother or attending a remote conference in the direction of his hometown. He was financing something or someone back in Idaho. The pivotal moment came one afternoon while he was on one of his long, performative, clearing my head runs. I searched his nightstand. Inside, buried beneath some outdated architecture blueprints, I found a second phone, one of those cheap prepaid burners. It was password protected, but classic, arrogant Ethan had scribbled the code on a sticky note stuck to the back. Too clever for a second phone, too careless to remember a simple PIN. The phone had only one contact saved. D had dozens of texts with Ethan arranging meetups and discussing money. Some referenced the long-term plan and staying the course. One text from 3 months ago was the clearest confirmation of the con. Just 2 more years and we're set. 2 more years until what? Until the partnership was signed? Until he could walk away with his guaranteed cut? I took hundreds of photos of every single text and contact with my own phone before carefully replacing the burner exactly as I had found it. The cold knot of fear had officially morphed into a hard strategic certainty. I had a name, a timeline, and a destination. The game had just moved from defense to offense. The discovery of the burner phone and the single contact D didn't feel like a breakthrough. It felt like receiving the complete script to a tragic play I'd been unknowingly starring in. I spent the next 3 days running on pure spite and an aggressive amount of black coffee. I was working from home, locking myself in my office, telling Ethan I had a major deadline. I needed to know everything about D. Using a VPN and the burner phone's number, I ran a deep digital forensic dive. I cross-referenced the number's area code, Boise, Idaho, with any public record associated with the name Baker. The truth hit me with the force of a truck. D is Denise Harrington. Denise Harrington wasn't a friend. She was Ethan's ex-fiancée, high school sweethearts. They broke up 6 months before he moved to the city, allegedly to pursue his architectural dream. The dream I believed in, the dream my father was about to fund. It all clicked. Ethan didn't move here heartbroken. He moved here with a plan, a long con. He met me at the gala, charmed dad, and engineered the speed of our engagement because he needed to secure the capital, my trust fund, and my father's company access for their future. He was financing his real life with my fake one. My biggest fear was confirmed when I found Denise's private social media. There were group photos from an Idaho wedding 3 months after Ethan and I got married, and in the background, there was Ethan. He'd told me he was on a work trip to scout materials in the Midwest that week. He was celebrating with his ex and their mutual friends. I went back to the burner phone photos and the transcribed texts. The most damning message from Denise read, "The vow renewal was the last hurdle before we can move to phase 2. Phase 2. It wasn't just about leaving me. It was a coordinated exit strategy, timed perfectly with the partnership deal. He'd secure a guaranteed high-level career track through dad's company, divorce me for half the marital assets, and then walk away with both the career and the cash to start his real life with Denise. I knew my parents, especially dad, would struggle to believe it. They loved this fraud. I couldn't just drop this bomb. They'd think I was paranoid or vengeful after seeing him weep over those vows. I needed undeniable courtroom-level proof, delivered in a way that destroyed his carefully constructed image permanently. I started compiling a comprehensive dossier. This wasn't just for a lawyer, this was for my father. Financial discrepancies, screenshots of the $17,000 in unaccounted for investments, showing the withdrawals corresponding perfectly to the times he visited Boise, disguised as business trips, the burner phone, transcribed conversations and photos of the text with Denise, including the Phase 2 trigger and the vow renewal hurdle. The paper trail. I dug up the incorporation documents for his supposed architectural dream business. It was all cheap shell companies, filed amateurishly in Delaware, a classic structure for hiding assets, not building a legitimate firm. I photographed the evidence of his shoddy documentation. The only piece missing was the final devastating nail, his voice confirming the whole scheme to Denise. I bought a tiny voice-activated recorder disguised as a cheap USB drive and hid it in the pen holder on his office desk. The silence in our house was suffocating, punctuated only by the steady drumbeat of my own rising anger, waiting for him to make that final, fatal call. The tiny USB drive, disguised as a generic flash memory stick, sat innocently in the pen holder on Ethan's desk. It had been there for 4 agonizing days. 4 days of silence, where the only noise was the low hum of our central air and the deafening sound of my own rising anxiety. I was living on edge, waiting for the signal, waiting for him to feel safe enough, or desperate enough, to make that crucial, final phone call to Denise. Every time Ethan walked past that desk, my heart hammered against my ribs. It felt like living with a ticking time bomb, where the only way to defuse it was to let it go off. I was playing the role of the devoted wife perfectly. I made his favorite coffee, I asked non-committal questions about his projects, and I made sure to leave my phone out, screen up, to reassure him that I was being transparent and had nothing to hide. Meanwhile, I was monitoring his shell company filings, finalizing the financial screenshots, and practicing my neutral expression in the bathroom mirror. The score happened late on Thursday night. I was lying in bed, practicing the roll over and breathe deeply maneuver, a technique I'd mastered to fake deep sleep, when I heard the telltale sound of the floorboards creaking. He was moving stealthily, too carefully for someone just getting water. I heard the soft click of our bedroom door and the muted padding of his bare feet heading toward his office. I waited 5 full minutes. I counted every second, focusing on the rhythmic sound of the running shower I'd started half an hour prior, just to ensure background noise. Then I slid out of bed and crept to the stairs, stopping exactly where I overheard the first betrayal. And then I got the confirmation. The sound of a man relaxing into his natural cruelty, talking freely, no longer guarded by the fear of being heard by his mark. He was talking to Denise. I could hear his annoyance, a strained sigh, as she clearly pressured him about money or timing. She just doesn't get it, D. She thinks I care about the lake house or her stupid charity dinners. All I see is the balance sheet. I just have to tolerate the smell of that artisanal soap she uses for a few more weeks. My blood ran cold, but I stayed still. The soap comment. It was so petty, so specific, and so real. He hated the tiny, expensive details of the life I loved. Then, the crucial part. The part that locked his fate and ended all arguments. Look, I told you, Dad Reed is finalizing the paperwork to bring me on as a junior partner next month. That's the Phase 2 trigger, not before. Once that contract is signed, the legal footing is solid. They can't just fire me. Then I file. I walk away with a career track and a clean half of the assets we acquired. I heard him reassure her about the money, mentioning a new, large wire transfer he was sending her next week to cover their apartment expenses. Just hold tight, baby. Soon you and I will have a life that's actually real. This is just a means to an end. A multi-million-dollar means at that. I stood there feeling absolutely nothing except a powerful, chilling sense of triumph. The man who wept fake tears at our vow renewal had just given me his entire confession, outlining his planned exit strategy, his financial motivations, and the exact timetable for the execution of the con. I had the complete, unedited audio of a high-level fraud. I waited until I heard him return upstairs and the soft closing of the bedroom door. I feigned a sudden urgent need for water, slipped into his office, retrieved the USB, plugged it into my laptop, and downloaded the file. I saved it under a random, innocuous file name, tax document Q3. I then wiped the device clean and returned it to the pen holder. The evidence was complete. My entire devastating case was ready. Now, I needed the stage. The man was arrogant, counting down the days until his success, his partnership signing set for the following Monday. I decided to accelerate his timetable, forcing his collapse before his victory. The most satisfying way to deliver this blow was in front of the man whose trust he sought to steal, Mr. Douglas Reed. I called Dad yesterday morning. Dad, I have the most amazing news, I said, my voice bright and genuinely enthusiastic, because I was thrilled. Ethan's architectural firm just landed this massive contract, huge prestige. I can't talk about details, but it's a game changer. I want to celebrate him and all the progress he's made right before he meets with you about the partnership. How about we have a small family dinner this Friday? Just Mom, you, Ethan, and me. Dad predictably was overjoyed. That's wonderful, Nat. My boy's moving up. Friday sounds perfect. I insisted we host it at our house. Ethan, listening from the kitchen island while making a show of reviewing blueprints, preened. He thought I was playing the supportive wife, celebrating his success. He spent the next day dry cleaning his best suit, calling his mother to boast, and practicing his sincere look in the hallway mirror. He was walking directly into the trap. He was prepping for his grand entrance, completely unaware that I was the one who had written his final, humiliating exit. He even told me he was planning a grand, elaborate toast. I'm going to thank you, babe, he said, practicing his sincere look, for being my rock, for believing in my vision. I just smiled that tight, supportive smile. That sounds lovely, Ethan. Little did he know, my toast was going to render his completely meaningless. The final scene was scheduled for this Friday night. I just had to wait 3 more hours. Friday night felt surreal. The atmosphere in our dining room was thick with a tension that only I perceived. A sharp, invisible wire pulled taut across the polished mahogany table. Mom, Nancy, was bubbling with excitement, talking about the next phase of our lives, the partnership, the kids, the family legacy. Dad, Douglas, looked absolutely beaming, radiating the pride of a mentor whose protege was finally succeeding. They were both perfect, unsuspecting targets. Ethan was in his element. He was wearing his best suit, perfectly tailored, smelling of expensive cologne and radiating a controlled smugness. He kept touching my shoulder, giving me these intimate, met patronizing glances that said, "Look at us, the perfect power couple. Aren't you lucky?" He was playing the supportive husband, the grateful son-in-law, for the last time. He was so close to the finish line, he could taste the victory. After we finished the main course, a ridiculously expensive salmon dish Mom had catered for the celebration, Ethan pushed his chair back slightly and reached for a water glass, tapping a fork against it. This was it. His final, triumphant, Oscar-worthy performance. "I'd like to make a toast," he began, his voice calibrated to sound sincere, humble, and just a little emotional. "To this incredible family, to Douglas and Nancy, for welcoming me into your fold and believing in my vision." He paused, locking eyes with Dad, who was glistening with pride. "And to my incredible wife, Natalie, for being my rock, my greatest inspiration, and for simply being the best thing that ever happened to me. To our future." He raised his glass, and my parents, bless their hearts, smiled warmly, echoing his words. "To the future." I took a slow sip of my wine, making sure the glass didn't shake, and set it down precisely. Then I stood up. I didn't rush it. I straightened my dress and took a breath. "Thank you, Ethan," I said, my voice steady, perhaps slightly louder than the polite chatter allowed. "That was a beautiful toast, but I think I need to offer one more, a toast to truth and clarity." The smile instantly slid off Ethan's face. He didn't just look confused, he looked alarmed. Dad looked puzzled, a slight frown forming. Ethan mentioned believing in his vision. I continued, addressing my parents, but my focus remained laser-locked on Ethan's widening eyes. "And I believe it's time to share that vision with you all, because it turns out the man we welcomed into our fold 3 years ago wasn't interested in a partnership. He was interested in a payout," Ethan stammered, his color draining instantly. "Nat, what are you doing? This isn't funny. Sit down." "It's not funny, Ethan," I confirmed, my voice dropping to a low, cold register that sounded utterly alien even to me. "It's a financial transaction." I walked calmly over to the decorative credenza I had strategically placed near the table and pulled out the manila envelope, the dossier. It felt heavy, filled with his lies. "Dad, Mom, please don't be angry with me," I said, my voice softening just for them. "I know you love him, but I need you to see the true nature of his character." I slid the dossier across the table to my father. "In here," I explained, maintaining total composure, "you'll find the financial trail showing Ethan has been sending large, unaccounted-for sums of money to a woman named Denise Harrington in Boise, Idaho, his ex-fiancée. You'll also find photos of a burner phone he used to communicate with her, referring to our marriage as a multi-million-dollar means to an end, and the vow renewal as the last hurdle before phase 2, the moment you signed him on as a partner." Ethan was out of his chair like a shot, lunging across the table for the envelope. "Don't touch that, Dad! It's fabricated! She's hysterical! She's trying to control me and destroy my career." My father, Douglas Reed, a man whose judgment was rarely wrong, didn't flinch. He intercepted Ethan's hand with the cold, hard force of his own, stopping him mid-reach. Then he opened the envelope. He scanned the documents, the texts, the withdrawal dates matching the business trips, the amateurish shell company filings. Ethan started screaming, his facade completely shattered. He was hyperventilating, his arms flailing. "It's a setup. She planted that phone. Ask her. She's an insane, jealous—" "It's not a setup," I interrupted, cutting through his hysteria. "It's a voice recording." I took out my laptop, plugged in the real USB drive, and without looking at Ethan, clicked play on the file labeled Tax Document Q3. Ethan's voice, loud, clear, and utterly cold, filled the stunned silence of the dining room. "Look, I told you. Dad Reed is finalizing the paperwork to bring me on as a junior partner next month. That's the phase 2 trigger, not before. Once that contract is signed, the legal footing is solid. Then I file. I walk away with the career track and a clean half of the assets we acquired. Just hold tight, baby. Soon you and I will have a life that's actually real. This is just a means to an end. A multi-million-dollar means, at that." The sound cut off. The silence that followed was suffocating, heavy with the weight of absolute, undeniable guilt. Dad closed the dossier. He didn't look at Mom, who was quietly weeping, or at me. He looked directly at Ethan with a depth of disgust that was terrifying to witness. "You are not the son I never had," Dad said, his voice quiet but shaking the room with its force. "You are simply a leech. The contract you were set to sign on Monday is null and void. You are done. Get out of my daughter's house." I didn't wait for Ethan's pitiful, sputtering response. I walked straight to the entryway closet, picked up my pre-packed duffel bag, and turned back to face the scene. Ethan's face, pale with terror, Dad's face, set with cold fury, and Mom, who was utterly broken. "I'm leaving now," I announced to the room, my voice flat, devoid of all emotion. "The locksmith is scheduled for tomorrow at 8 a.m. If you are not out of this house by then, I will have the police escort you. Everything you brought into this marriage fits in that duffel bag." I walked out the front door, leaving the three of them, the broken family, the exposed fraud, in the wreckage of his shattered life. The silence in Chloe's apartment was the first genuine peace I'd felt in weeks. I wasn't shaking anymore. I was running on a strange cold fuel, the kind of quiet focus you get right after a severe shock. Chloe, my friend and reluctant conspirator, didn't pry. She just handed me a glass of water, followed by a strong scotch, and a sticky note with a name and number of the city's top family law attorney. The consultation was set for 9 a.m. the next morning. The inevitable digital onslaught began almost immediately. My phone became a hot brick in my hand, vibrating constantly with Ethan's aggressive, panicked text messages. He cycled through phases. First, the pleading husband, "Babe, please, let's just talk. You're overreacting. It's just a friend." Then the financially threatened fraud, "You stole my property. You'll face charges. I'll take you for everything." And finally, the unhinged manipulator. "You're destroying my professional life out of sheer jealousy. You're sick, Natalie." I blocked his number and every email address he tried. He hired a sharp, predatory lawyer who tried every textbook maneuver. They served me with divorce papers framed by a narrative claiming I was an emotionally abusive, paranoid wife who had fabricated evidence out of spite. They claimed the financial withdrawals were legitimate loans he took for my benefit to start a fictional boutique consulting firm, and that the audio recording was crudely doctored. They threw everything they had at the wall, but their argument shattered on contact with the dossier. My attorney, a woman named Ms. Henderson who had the cold, quiet confidence of a seasoned killer, just smiled. "They're fighting a recording, Nat," she told me, "and a paper trail that lines up like a subway schedule." The legal process, which should have dragged out for months of emotional and financial torment, was shockingly swift. We went straight to a motion to declare the marriage void due to fraud. The judge listened to the recording, examined the financial screenshots juxtaposed with the burner phone texts, and reviewed the timeline of his business trips to Boise. Ethan's lawyer was left sputtering. Ethan's claims for joint assets were dismissed almost immediately. The court saw his scheme for what it was: high-level, premeditated financial fraud. The marriage was declared dissolved, and he was ordered to vacate the premises permanently and cover a substantial portion of my legal fees. The clean half of the assets he had planned on was reduced to exactly zero. He was financially ruined and professionally finished. The family fallout was intensely painful for my parents. Dad took the betrayal as a personal and professional failure of judgment. He retreated for a few weeks, devastated, but then his legendary business focus returned with a vengeance. He didn't just fire Ethan. He ensured Ethan Baker was effectively blacklisted from every reputable firm in our industry and social circle. He made sure the consequences were permanent. Then came the final, bizarre, and profoundly satisfying twist. About a week after the final hearing, when Ethan was legally cut off, I received a message on social media from a profile I didn't recognize. It was Denise Harrington, D. She was reaching out, not to gloat, but because she was furious. She attached screenshots of her own conversations with Ethan. They confirmed that she and Ethan had been in contact the entire time we were married, with Ethan sending her money regularly and promising they'd be together once the plan was complete. Her texts were venomous. She was enraged that her financial security, which Ethan had promised her, was now gone. One screenshot hit particularly hard. It was a recent conversation where she had texted him, "You promised me that money would get us the apartment in Boise. What now?" He had replied, trying to downplay the loss, "It's fine, babe. I'll make it back." The audacity was endless. She was trying to leverage sympathy from me, the woman he had victimized, claiming Ethan had told her I was just a phase and so self-absorbed you'd never find out. I read her message and I felt a heavy wave of pity. She actually believed she was special, his true love, that he wouldn't do to her what he did to me. She was just another tool, a different kind of asset he was willing to manipulate and discard. I took a deep breath, composed myself, and sent her back one final message. It was short, quiet, and conclusive. "Good luck. You'll need it." The moment the gavel fell, a small, definitive sound in a quiet, sterile courtroom, and Ms. Henderson, my lawyer, turned to me with a nod that signaled complete, non-negotiable victory, I felt an abrupt, stunning absence. It wasn't the rush of adrenaline-fueled euphoria I had anticipated. It was a void, a deep physical exhaustion that settled in my bones, as heavy and cold as the truth I had carried for months. The fight was over, the predator financially immolated, his escape route sealed, but the woman who had fought him was spent. I had won the war, but I still had to reckon with the battlefield inside my own head. It's been 6 months since I walked out of that dining room leaving the scene of his final performance. I'm back in the house now, but it is no longer the house we built. It is the shell I reclaimed. The first thing I did after changing all the locks, physical and digital, was to systematically purge every trace of him. This wasn't just throwing out clothes, it was a ritual exorcism of the pretense. I sold the expensive, overly formal dining room furniture, including the ridiculous mahogany credenza where I'd hidden the dossier. I replaced it with a simpler, smaller, rustic table, a nod to the quiet solitude of the lake cabin where I'd begun my investigation. The house no longer smells of his expensive, aggressive cologne. It smells of freshly cut lavender and clean wood polish. It feels like mine again. The hardest realization wasn't that he hadn't loved me. It was that the one Natalie Redon who believed his tears, who packed his favorite beer, who thought love was enough to overcome a middle-class chip on the shoulder, was dead. That naive, warm-hearted woman had to be strategically killed off so that the colder, more ruthless survivor size could emerge. I had to learn to be suspicious, how to be cold, how to be utterly detached while my world was collapsing around me. For months, I was a double agent in my own life, calculating interest rates while his hand rested on my thigh, mentally transcribing burner phone texts while he talked about future plans. That level of prolonged duplicity leaves scars, not just emotional ones, but a lingering psychological shadow. I still flinch when the house is too quiet, and the thought of receiving a surprise makes my stomach clench. Trust is now a concept I have to read about in books, not something I practice with people. The family healing was slow, centered mainly on my father. Douglas. Dad had always prided himself on his ability to judge character. It was the cornerstone of his business success. Ethan's betrayal was a public, painful rebuke of that judgment. He was crushed, not by the money, but by the fact that he had welcomed a viper into his home, mentored him, and proudly offered him the family legacy. For weeks, he barely spoke, his office door closed, the light perpetually off. I didn't push him. I just brought him tea and let him stew in the silence. When he finally emerged, his fury was cold and absolute. He used his influence to execute a quiet, devastating vengeance. Ethan wasn't just fired. He was systematically blacklisted. From every reputable architectural firm, every venture capital group, and every social circuit in the region. It was a complete professional annihilation, delivered personally by the man Ethan sought to steal from. That was my true victory, confirming that my father's love for me outweighed his professional pride, and that his retribution was as absolute as my own. The closure wasn't just about winning the legal battle or seeing him professionally ruined. It was about confronting the rest of the lie. The final bizarre chapter came with Denise Harrington, D. When I read her frantic messages, her pure materialistic rage over the lost money, I understood the true pathology of the scam. Ethan hadn't been financing a home for his true love. He was financing an escape route. Denise was collateral damage, a different kind of asset he was willing to use and discard. She thought she was special. I knew I was just a means. Her last desperate message, where she claimed Ethan told her I was self-absorbed and would never find out, finally brought a genuine, bitter laugh to my lips. It was the confirmation that my cold, strategic performance had been flawless. I had succeeded in convincing the con artist himself that his mark was too shallow and stupid to detect the fraud. My final act in that bizarre play was sending her that text. Good luck. You'll need it. It was a quiet, final statement. I was washing my hands of his entire pathetic web of deceit. It was a closure for me, but a new, bitter beginning for her. The lingering ghost of Ethan's presence is slowly fading. I no longer check my bank account daily, nor do I glance at the penholder on the desk. But sometimes when I'm alone, I feel a quiet need to confirm the truth. Last week, my mom sent me a Facebook screenshot. It was Ethan, posing at some minor charity event in a different state with a new girlfriend. He looked exactly the same, impeccably dressed, charming, with those sincere, intense eyes and the posture of an ambitious man. My first reaction was not jealousy or anger. It was a profound bodily relief that his performance is now someone else's problem. Relief that I don't have to wonder if every smile, every kind word, every gesture of affection is part of some elaborate script designed to access her family's capital. I recognized the opening scene of her play, and I was grateful that my own curtain had already closed. I know I will never be the same. The woman I was, the easygoing, trusting Natalie, is gone. The new Natalie is careful, fiercely private, and exceptionally good at financial due diligence. The cost was high. 3 years of my life and the complete erosion of my innocence. But the reward was the knowledge that I faced a calculated predator and beat him at his own game, not by descending into hysteria, but by ascending into cold, precise strategy. I have come to terms with the title he gave me, the final insult that drove my revenge. The money wife is dead. Long live just plain Natalie. I wrote the closing scene, and I made sure he paid the full price of admission. My final transaction was reclaiming myself.